area, data management and research integrity in STEM, of course, being co-hosted by Africa Research and Impact Network, and then Taylor and Francis Group. In this era, where data fuels scientific discovery and innovation, it is very critical that we need to ensure there is proper data management. And number two, we also need to ensure that upholding research integrity as a critical agenda in the research process. Even as we engage in research and trying to even churn out different knowledge products, it is important for us to understand that we must strengthen our commitment and transparency, and in addition to reproducibility, to ensure that there is accountability in the STEM research. This workshop, of course, then provides a unique platform for fellows in ARIN, for experts, for researchers, and practitioners just to engage in meaningful discussions around four thematic areas. That is best practices for organizing, storing, and sharing research, ethical challenges in data collection and reporting, prevent data manipulation, plagiarism, and research misconduct, even in the era where currently we have AI and other technologies that are helping us even in right. So how do we prevent that? And then the role of data technology in safeguarding research integrity. Through this program and also through the ARIN Fellowship, you find that it fits accurately because through the fellowship, we try to nurture early career researchers in how to develop different knowledge products. And through that, we hope that this workshop is going to be impactful, even in equipping them with skills, equipping them with knowledge that they will be able to use in their research agenda. At ARIN, we reinforce these principles, of course, through the initiative like this ARIN Fellowship. Of course, we are empowering early career researchers, and we are also trying to invest in the next generation of researchers that will help in strengthening the Africa research ecosystem. And in that, it will ensure that the scientific advancement of course, remain transparent. They also are impactful, and also they are trustworthy and in the process of developing them. And we do hope that even through this workshop, we are going to engage in some discussions. We are going also to share some insights, and we are also going to collaborate even towards strengthening research integrity in our respective fields. With that, I want to welcome our speakers, and I look forward to an insightful and enriching session. Thank you, and back to you, Dr. Akinyi.
Thank you very much, Agevi. And so for today's session, we're going to have two keynote speakers, and then after that, we're going to have a scheduled session for Q&A, where we're going to interact and engage with our speakers and even among ourselves. So the first speaker that we're going, before we get to our speakers, I want to welcome. Of course, we appreciate the fact that this workshop has been organized by ARIN and Taylor and Francis, and I just want to welcome our representative from Taylor and Francis, Anubuti, to tell us briefly just about Taylor and Francis as a publishing institution. Over to you, Anubuti.
Thank you, Akini, and thank you, Dr. Agevi, for such a wonderful introduction to the webinar. My name is Anubhuti Dhingra. I am Assistant Marketing Manager at Taylor and Francis Group. Ahead of the session, I would like to take a moment to introduce Taylor and Francis to all participants. Taylor and Francis is one of the world's leading academic publishers and one of its most enduring. For more than 2 centuries, Taylor and Francis has been committed to the highest quality scholarly publishing, and this will remain our goal today. Our purpose is to foster human progress through knowledge, something we've been doing since the Enlightenment. We aim to promote a positive future for everyone through our work. Our imprints include Taylor and Francis, Routledge, CRC Press, F1000 Research, and Duff Press. We've published over 150,000 books and we publish over 2,700 journals. Taylor and Francis stands as one of the globe's premier publishers of open access research. Opting to publish with us opens up an array of open access avenues tailored to your preferences. This facilitates adherence to any funder stipulations and ensures the dissemination of your research for maximal impact. This workshop will focus on best practices in data stewardship, ethical considerations in research, and strategies to ensure transparency and reproducibility in STEM fields. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand the mic to back to Akini to introduce our first speaker for the day.
Thank you very much, Adibute. So our first speaker of the day is Solomon Jani. Solomon is just briefly about Solomon. Solomon is a results-oriented professional who has over 7 years experience in driving data-driven decision-making and delivering actionable insights. As the head of data research and analytics at Sonic Data School, he specializes in transforming complex data sets into strategic initiatives that optimize performance and enhance business growth. With him, he has very key skills in data as far as data management is concerned, and that is data strategy and governance, advanced analytics, and all that. And he's proficient in very many softwares, including Python, R, Tableau, Power BI, and all that. These are so many. And we truly appreciate how experienced Solomon is. So, Solomon, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm hoping that I'm not speaking alone. It happens most of the time. I'm hoping that I'm clear. Someone can confirm about that.
Loud and clear.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. So my name is Solomon, as you have heard. I work at Sonic Data School and Consultancy Group as the head of data and analytics. And I'm excited to join you for this particular subject. And this is one of the most important aspects, looking at what is happening as far as data and analytics is confirmed. Well, my bit of a background, I have two different backgrounds. I have a background in information technology. That was my first undergraduate degree. Went and I did a bachelor's degree again in economics. I also have a master's in economics, a master's in data science from London Business School, and also in my last touch for my PhD in economics. Well, I'm also quite excited that what we're going to be discussing today is my subject of interest. And by my subject of interest, what specifically do I mean? We're just looking about this oil that we are calling data. And of course, I'm very sure that most of you have heard the phrases that, of course, data is the new oil. And the reason as why they say that is because most of the organization, this is the time that they're actually realizing that they need to use data as far as each and every decision is concerned. And of course, we always say as analysts that if you find any organization that is not using data to be able to assist them to make a decision as far as their organization's running is concerned, that is just like a deer in the forest that is confused on what kind of the direction that they should be taking. I'm also very glad to, of course, join the two organizations that have organized this particular workshop. Of course, the Africa Research and Impact Network and also the Francis Group. Thank you so much for making sure that you're organizing such kind of an important topic of discussion. And of course, you're going to be talking about the data management and research integrity in, of course, the STEM. Maybe for someone who is hearing STEM for the very first time, it stands for of course, the fields of science, technology, of course, engineering and mathematics. And of course, as the topic states that, of course, in the era where the data drives innovation, of course, the proper data management and adherence to research integrity, they are more critical than ever. That is a main statement. They are more critical than ever. And of course, there's quite a number of things that you're going to be discussing, of course, from the best practices for organizing, storing, and of course, sharing information, the ethical challenges in data collection and reporting, the prevention of data manipulation, plagiarism, and research misconduct. And of course, very important, the role of the technology in ensuring the research integrity. Well, I have quite a vast of experience training a lot of so many students. I'm a lecturer. I teach economics at most of the Kenyan universities, and there's one thing that you're going to actually realize that is so common among all of them. Most of them, they're normally very confused on what to do. And of course, it comes to their research or maybe their dissertation or whichever kind of a project that they want to finish, of course, before they can head for their graduation and, of course, to graduate for the various qualifications they're having. And of course, you're always going again to say that there are quite a number of challenges. So maybe Akinyi, you can confirm how many minutes do I have so that I can, there's quite a lot of things that I would say in this topic. So do you want to summarize it? I don't know how many minutes I have.
You got at most 20 minutes.
Okay, good. Thank you. That is enough. So I was saying that from my background being a lecturer, I also teach data science and all of that from the Sonic Data School. You're going to realize that there's quite a lot of things that you need to understand as far as the field of the data is concerned. Because of course, you're always going to realize that most other people that there's going to be confusing that you being an analyst with the ethical, of course, consideration that come with it. And of course, you're going to realize that as a very first topic talks about the best practices for organizing and of course, storing and sharing the research data. And as my research, of course, is based in Kenya, to be very specific. And of course, you're going to realize that proper research data management ensures that, of course, you have the accuracy, the security, accessibility, and of course, the long-term preservation of valuable information. And to give a very simple example, for instance, in Kenya, most of the researchers, you must adhere to the institutional and to the national data policies while leveraging the technology for efficient data handling. I'm very sure so there are quite a number of people that do not know that there are national data policies that are actually available when it comes to you being able to handle all this information, because you can be very sure, regardless of the discipline that you are in, there's quite a lot of data that are actually behind that. And of course, if there's data, then you also need to know how you're dealing with that data. Because I don't know whether you knew that, for example, sharing someone's information, it's actually an offense that is punishable by law. I also think that most of the people, they always don't take to that part. And of course, apart from that, you're also going to realize that in most other cases that most people will always be taking almost each and everything for granted. And of course, looking at all the aspect of the data, then you need to be very careful, because even if you work for organization, that of course you want to handle the data and all of that, to some extent, you're even liable. You yourself as a personal, or rather as an individual, you are liable for some losses that come from you handling the data. And of course, from the very first onset, you need to make sure that you are organizing your research. And of course, this proper organization of research, you will always ensure that you have, you improve your efficiency. And of course, it also makes it easier to retrieve and of course, analyze information. And there's quite a number of ways in which you can basically be able to organize the research data and such. Of course, you can use I'm very sure you have heard about the standardized naming conventions, of course, and of course, all your files and the folders and all the other information, the way you're having them should basically be very clear. And of course, they should also be very descriptive and consistent to avoid the confusion. And of course, I'm also very sure that you're aware about the recommended format. And these are some of the few things that you also need to make sure that as far as the standardized naming is concerned, okay, so I can see there's some question. No, I'm not sure. I've not actually any presentation. This is all something that I've always been doing for the longest time, but If need be, there's quite a number of slides that I can be able to share maybe after the session for your use. Now, of course, the second thing that you also need to make sure that as far as the organizing the research data is concerned is categorize and, of course, you structure all the files logically. I'm very sure that the Francis and the group, the Francis group and all that, there are the very specific ways that they always make sure that before they do the publishing, there's a very way that they categorize and they structure the files logically by use of, for instance, of the folders, the subfolders, and all of that to create or rather to come up with a group data based on the research studies. Of course, from the research studies, you always know that any particular time that you are having all of that, you'll basically need to move from the raw data to the processed information or to the processed data to the reports and of course to the publication. And by the way, you can also be able to use spreadsheets. For a very simple a very simple example will be something like Excel. And you can always be able to track the metadata, including the file name, the description, and of course, any kind of an update that you give as far as the history of that is concerned. And of course, there's also the documentation. All right, there's quite a, I'm very sure that some of you may have heard about what we call the metadata, and the metadata will always be providing you the context to the research data. For example, such as where did you get the data from? That is what we call the data sources, or rather, basically, where was it collected? So what is the date of the collection, for instance? And of course, what are the variables and the cases that are used for that? And of course, you can always be able to use the tools like DataCite or Dublin Code. Of course, those are used, or rather, those are the widely accepted standardized metadata kind of the description. And of course, you also need to make sure that you have a way that you're storing the research data securely. Of course, the most important aspect of that is about you need to prevent the data loss. You also need to prevent the unauthorized access and the corruption. And of course, a very simple example that I've always been using. At one particular point, you receive a call from some people, and of course, those people, they're telling you that, my name is this one, I'm calling you from Equity Bank, just an example, all right? Or rather KCB Bank, or maybe any other bank that we have in Kenya. And of course, by the time you're realizing you have given them some information about yourself, and all your accounts and all your savings and all your retirement has been wiped off. Of course, you're always going to realize that any particular time that someone gets an access to your data, then they can always be able to use that, of course, harmfully. And of course, how can you also be able to make sure that you're able to secure the research data securely? Number one, you can do what you call the cloud storage solution. I'm very sure that you have heard about the cloud storage solution, and some of those cloud storage solution is that rather just to try and explain what a cloud would mean. You want to store data somewhere online. It's not like you have any drive or you have any flash disk that you're using. No, you want to store somewhere online. And that's why it's called a cloud, because it's not like there's a physical place that you're storing that. And of course, you can use something like even the Google Drive is part of that. You can use the Dropbox. You can use the OneDrive, right? You have heard about the institutional repositories. And of course, those one will always also be giving you an allowance to ensure that you have the backup and the accessibility. And I don't know whether some of you are aware that we have Kenya Open Data Portal that is normally publicly shareable. You can always be able to use the Kenya Open Data Portal. So maybe after the session, you can be able to go and check what is Kenya Open Data Portal and all of that. And of course, apart from the use of the cloud storage solution, you can do what we call the multiple backups, all right? And of course, we always follow a rule that is called 3 to 1. I don't know, again, whether you are aware about that the rule 3 to 1, it talks about you keeping 3 copies of the data. It is 1 original and 2 backups, all right? So those are 3. And then you now go to the second rule. Remember the first one is 3. Remember the rule is 3 to 1. So 3 copies of the data, that is 1 original and 2 backups. And then for the 2, you need to have 2 different data, storage formats. You can have one in cloud and another one as an external hard drive. And of course, the last one, you can have an offsite backup. By offsite backup, this is what it means. You need to store it in a different locations. And if you use that rule of 3 to 1, there's no any other time that even if you lose a copy of the data, you'll always have ways in which you're still going to be having that back. And of course, maybe the third thing about the multiple backups, you can talk about use of the secure physical storage for the sensitive data. So of course, you ensure that the hard drives in the flash disk, of course, are encrypted. So they have a password that not just any other person can be able to access that. And of course, you can also be able to store that in a locked cabinet so that no one can just come and access that. And of course, you can also be, as part of the physical storage, you can talk about the paper record. Of course, you should always be able to scan and of course digitize for the safer story. And a very other simple example would be, of course, back when I was taking my my undergraduate quite a number of years ago, I used to scan my of course my student ID. Up to date, I still have my student ID, even for high school. You see, the high school you had a student ID, I still have it. I don't know how many people you have such kind of an information, because of course you're going to realize maybe some of you, you may only be having the birth certificate and the national ID out of the stretch of the history of the kind of the documentation, I mean, the official documentation that you are having. So those are the kind of the things in which you can be able to do. So maybe some of the people might see that maybe these are something that might be illogical, but this is a funny thing. I still have a book that I used in Standard 7. Yeah? I was in Standard 7 in early 2000. So you can imagine I still have such kind of a book. Now you can imagine how many books I have for high school. So I always sit down and try to check what is happening there, because I've made sure that I'm able to store all that information in a very good way so that I can always be able to refer something. And of course, as you move on, you're going to realize, for instance, in the Department of Business in the university, it always share a lot of information from for example, from the business books in high school and all of that, because it's an advance of what you were taught in high school. And of course, you can also, as the fourth thing, maybe you can talk about it, you implement the data encryption and the access control. I'm very sure you have heard about the BitLocker. These are applications that you can always be able to have them in your computer so that you can always be able to store and lock all those information. And of course, it will always also be able to give you, of course, to store your data, or rather to strictly restrict access to your data using a password protection, or what we call the role-based permissions and all of that. You can also be able to talk about maybe as also the other thing, the other third way in which you can be able to manage your data easily, it's sharing the data responsibly. All right. So some of you just wake up one time, someone asks you that they need this information, and then blah blah blah. You have just given them. You even don't know how they're going to be used. And again, a very simple example that I always again use. If you're to go, for example, to a mall, or maybe you go to a shopping complex, and then, of course, as you're going maybe to park in the basement, so there's some information that you need to leave at the gate. Why would you give an ID? Why would you give your ID when you're going to park your vehicle? Why should you give your ID number? Now, remember, if you give your ID number and you give your phone number and you give your name, do you know that with that three things, any basic person can be able to access your information? So those are some of the very few things that you always need to be very careful about. If someone asks you about your name and your ID number, those are your identification. Why would you just wake up one time and then you just give them? It cannot happen that way. So you always make sure that you're giving out of course, your information responsibly. And of course, the data sharing, again, it will always be promoting the collaboration, transparency, and reproductive part of the same data that you're giving out. But of course, you must always make sure that you're doing it in a very ethical way, and of course, in a very other secure way. For instance, at the University of Nairobi, there's what we call the digital repository. And of course, I still think that Egerton, the last time I was checking, as I was having classes there, as I was teaching there, they had an institution repository. So those are some of the digital repositories for the research publication and the data set that you can always be able to use. And of course, I've talked about the public data set. You can also be able to share it under the Kenya Open Data Portal. And of course, other platforms like Zenobol. We also have another one that is called Figures. There's quite a number of them that you can always be able to do the same thing. And then, of course, apart from that, as part of sharing your data, don't just share the data. You can even apply what we call the data sharing agreement, the DSAs. All right. So the formal data sharing agreements, you must always be able to write them down. If you want to share with someone, then you must go to a lawyer and you seek that I'm giving this information to this person. If that information is not, or rather, if that is information is, of course, produced to the unintended people, then you can always take a legal action to those people. And of course, with that one, you control who can access the data. You also control how your data is going to be used, and of course, the data protection measures as part of that. And of course, you should also ensure compliance with NACOSTI. I don't know whether you know the NACOSTI. NACOSTI is the National Commission for Science, Technology, and Innovation Regulations. So again, those are some of the few things in which, I mean, those are some of the few other ways in which you can also be able to consider that. And of course, again, as part of sharing the same data, any particular time that you're sharing those such kind of very sensitive information, then also ensure that the data anonymization for the confidentiality. Just share the data anonymously. All right. So you remove the personal identifiers like the names, the ID numbers, the GPS locations before sharing such kind of very sensitive data. And of course, you also make sure that you also use what we call the data masking. All right, to protect the participant privacy and all of that. And of course, there's also quite a number of ways in which you can be able to include in the same thing. Maybe the other thing would be the compliance with the ethical and of course the legal standard. And of course, the Kenyan researcher, or rather as a researcher, you must always follow ethical and the legal guidelines to protect the data integrity. Of course, I'm very sure you know about the data protection laws that we have in the country. For instance, the Kenya Data Protection Act of 2019 that requires the researchers to obtain an informed consent before they collect the personal data. There's not just any particular time you'll wake up one day and now you decide that, I want to go and collect the data. No, you need to have a consent before collecting that personal data. And of course, you also ensure that you have the data security and privacy, okay? And of course, apart from that, you also ensure that you allow your participant to request the data deletion if necessary. If they've given you information, and of course, that information you have already used it in the intended purpose, then some of the participants, they'll tell you, make sure that you delete the data after that. And of course, you must always make sure that you're following the same thing. And of course, you also need to seek the ethical approval for research. The researchers must obtain the clearance from the regulatory bodies, such as the National Commission for Science, Technology, and of course, Innovation, the Institutional Ethics and Review Boards, and the IRBs. I'm very sure that maybe those are some of maybe the jargons that you can hear from my presentation and such. But again, you always need to make sure that you're able to check on that. And of course, you may also consider to implement the data retention and the disposal policies. We always say that store the research data for at least 5 years. All right. And of course, by then you're going to realize that most of the funding agencies are always going to give you the same regulation. That any particular time you have collected information and you have it, just have it at least for 5 years. All right. So that in case anything happens in between those 5 years, at least you're able to know, of course, how to do that. So, and of course, properly dispose the outdated or unnecessary data using a secure deletion methods. So some of you will just dump information. All right. And maybe it might not be necessary to you, but someone else can use that information in a way that they cannot, in a way that it might be harmful to the people who gave the information on the same. And of course, the effective organization, storage, and the sharing of the research data, of course, will always require a proper structuring, the secure storage solution, responsible sharing. I'm still keeping on insisting on that. And of course, the legal compliance. And of course, by you adopting the best practices, all right, you're always going to realize that as a researcher, you can always enhance the credibility, security, and impact of your specific work that you are dealing with. And of course, you also have what we call the ethical challenges, right? The ethical challenges in the data collection and reporting. And of course, again, in this, for example, in Kenya, to be very specific, the researchers will always often encounter the ethical challenges that is related to privacy, consent, data accuracy, maybe confidentiality, and maybe even bias, all right? And of course, addressing these challenges is very essential to maintain the trust and uphold the ethical standard in both academic and scientific research. And of course, what are some of the ways in which you can be able to consider in terms of the ethical challenges in the data collection and such? Of course, number one, I think I had mentioned about that. You need, of course, to have an informed consent. You need to have consent from participants before you collect those data. Of course, in rural maybe areas, there's also an issue with the language barriers and low literacy levels. So make sure that, of course, they are able to understand what those consent form talks about, because again, some of them might have a challenge in terms of the understanding. So you can also use the digital consent method, such as the e-signatures. You can have an online signature, right? Of course, this one is not really widely adopted. I don't know why, but most of the people still we are still behind. But of course, we must always be able, in case you are not able to access someone physically, you can use an e-signature and all of that. And of course, it's also what you call the coercion and the manipulation. In some cases, the participant may feel pressured, by the way, to participate in a research due to a financial incentive, all right, or maybe their authority influence. And a very simple example would be like maybe someone is paying you to provide a certain information. So again, you see, you are coerced and you're manipulated, that even if you are to provide this kind of an information, you'll provide that information because you need the money. And I don't know whether it's the right example to use, but I think we let an example be an example. It doesn't need to, of course, to be directed to anyone. There is this kind of, I think, an online thing that the Gen Zs were really using. The one that was scanning the eyeball. You can remember it. It was there, I think, early last year. The one that people used to scan the eyeball, because you are given some money once you do that. You see, you're being coerced and manipulated. What if that information is used with the purpose that is not supposed to be used? You see again, you're providing information the way you should not have done the same thing. And of course, another example would be maybe if you are a student still at the university, and of course you're feeling obligated to participate in your professor's research or in your lecturer's research. Again, you see, you are afraid that maybe you might fail if you do not do a particular thing that maybe the lecturer is saying and all that. So you are again being manipulated in a way. And of course, you also have the vulnerable populations, all right? And of course, when it comes to the vulnerable population, such as the refugees and the people of low-income areas, they may not be able to fully understand their rights to withdraw from maybe a study at any particular point. And of course, some of the solution to that is by use of a simple and translated consent form for clarity. You also ensure that the participation is voluntary. Do not give someone pressure to provide information. If they do not want, then just leave it. And of course, you can also utilize the audio visual methods to explain the concept to participants with low literacy level. Of course, we also have what we call the privacy and the confidentiality concern, which include the unauthorized access to the personal data. Of course, apart from that, we also have anonymity challenges that, for example, in some small communities, it makes it difficult to maintain the participant anonymity due to the very close social ties. And of course, some of the solution again to that is basically make sure that you are able to have coding system instead of real names in the reports. It's not a must to have the real names. You can basically come up with a coding system to be able to identify whoever gave information to you and all of that. And of course, under the data fabrication and falsification, all right, the pressure to publish. We always have all these things. You have a lot of pressure. The researchers face increased pressure to publish the academic journals for career progression, maybe leading some of them to manipulate and fabricate data, of course, to achieve the desired results. So those are some of, again, of the things that you also need to consider. You also have the limited funding and competition for grants that can also tempt the researchers to exaggerate the findings and all of that. Maybe you also have something that we call under the data fabrication and falsification. We have something that we normally refer to the selective reporting, right? That some researchers will always be omitting the data that does not support their hypothesis, leading to biased conclusion and all of that. And of course, in surveys and fieldwork, some enumerators after, of course, will always be altering the responses to fit expected outcomes, and of course, reduce the workload and all of that. Again, some of the solution is basically conduct what we call the random audit and the data verification, of course, to detect the fabrication and all of that. And then, of course, encourage a culture of transparency, where negative and unexpected research, of course, are also reported. And of course, you can also implement very strict penalties for researchers that are found guilty of the data falsification and all of that. We also have what we call the data bias in data collection and the interpretation. And of course, the researchers may decide to they may unintentionally frame question and interpret data in a way that they support their, of course, conceived ideas. And of course, the political and the corporate funding may also influence the researchers to skew the results, of course, to meet the funders' expectation and all of that. Of course, you also have what we call the sampling bias, that some of the studies are non-representative samples, of course, leading to misleading conclusions. So you might also find that researchers sometimes focus on easily accessible participants, right? You don't want to go hard to reach the population. You just want to see who is just available there, even if they're not in the discipline that you're looking for. And of course, you also have the ethical issues in the digital and the online research. The lack of the regulations on the digital data collection is one of them. Of course, with the rise of the online surveys and the social media research, many studies collect the personal data without clear ethical guidelines. And of course, some other online research methods do not obtain explicit consent from participants, of course, violating again the same ethical standards that we are talking about. We also have the use of AI and the big data without participant knowledge, all right? Of course, some research institution will always be using AI, what we call the artificial intelligence and the big data analytics, to track the trends without informing individual that their data is being used, all right? And of course, you also have some of the possible solution to that, which would include you establish a clear regulation on the ethical digital research. And of course, you also ensure online research platform requires explicit consent for participants. And also the researchers should explain how AI and big data they're used in research to promote, of course, the transparency. Maybe we can also touch a bit on the ethical dilemmas in the community-based research. For example, you might find that we have the cultural sensitivity that in some topics such as sexual health, for instance, or gender-based violence or traditional medicine may be sensitive in certain Kenyan communities. And of course, researchers sometimes may face resistance or suspicion from the local leaders, making it so much difficult to collect the data from that. And of course, you also have what we call the ethical challenges in the government and the policy research. Of course, some government-funded research may be influenced to produce politically favorable results rather than objective finding. And of course, these are some of the few things that, of course, you find happening mostly in the current Kenyan that, of course, we are looking for. Well, maybe as I finalize, because I can say that, of course, I'm being alerted that my time is up. Well, how would we prevent the data manipulation and all of that? What are some of the strategies? Maybe I can mention out. And some of them I had already talked about. Let me add, apart from just things like the cloud-based platform, I can also add something that is called the blockchain technology. And I don't know how easy I can be able to explain what is a blockchain technology, but I would say, assuming I give you my name, for example, my name is Solomon Jane, but now I do not give you my name the way it is in full. I'll give you some letters and I'll mix up the letters. And then I'll tell you, of course, I'm assuming you don't know my name. So I'm just giving you some letters and I've told you, generate my name from that. There's a higher chance that you'll never do that. That is how blockchain technology works. You're able to access the information, you can see them, but you cannot organize them the way they should. And that is one of the best ways in which you can always be able to, of course, store your data. And of course, you can use what we call the standardized data collection and analysis tool. And of course, something like maybe SPSS or Stata or R or NVivo will always be helping the researchers to analyze the data transparently, of course, reducing the likelihood of the data manipulation and of course, all of that. And of course, you can also be able to do what we call the data audits. Again, just to touch on the plagiarism, of course, this is basically the act of presenting someone else's work as your own. This is so common everywhere that there's a rise of AI, the ChatGPT and all of that, and is one of the major academic offenses. And of course, it damages the credibility of the research and leads to severe penalties, including academic dismissal and all of that. Some of the tools in which you can be able to to prevent plagiarism there's a system called Turnitin. There's a system that is called Turnitin. I don't know whether you know it. It is, of course, widely used in academic institution to check that out. So you can use the Glamory, you can use the Authenticate. So those are some of the ways in which you can be able to do that. again, you ought to educate the researchers on proper citation and references. I think that is also one of the challenges that we always have, mostly the Kenyan universities and such. And of course, you also promote a culture of originality. Why would you say that it is yours and it is not yours? Research institutions are emphasizing on the academic honesty. Of course, that one will discourage the plagiarism and all of that. And of course, you also need to have what you call the strict institutional penalties for the plagiarism, for those people who are always going to be having the misconduct, and of course, and all of that. Maybe as I start, as I finalize, I'm sorry, just one more minute. The role of technology, I must touch on that in ensuring the research integrity in this case. Again, we are talking about technology involvement in that. And of course, one of them is making sure that you're doing the plagiarism detection and prevention. We have talked about that. The other thing, now just to touch on those points very specific as I finalize, of course, the data management, storage and security. I've also talked about things like Google Drive, the Dropbox, the OneDrive, and all of that. That is involvement of the technology in making sure that, of course, there is a research integrity, the data management tools again, the likes of the SPSS, NVivo, and maybe Python and all of that. And then, of course, you can always be able to, another way in which tech has really assisted in this is open access and the digital repositories. The Kenya National Library Service, digital repository. There's also University of Nairobi, digital repository. Egerton University, the same. The Kenya Education Network, Kenneth Digital Repository. I was almost forgetting about that. And of course, it will always ensure that the research findings are publicly available. You can access them. It will also reduce the cases of duplicate and the fraudulent research. It will also provide you with the reliable references for the future. And of course, you can also talk about what we call the aspect of the ethical compliance and the research monitoring. And of course, the researchers must always submit the proposal for ethical approval through the online system. Again, that is technology, such as Kenya. I don't know when, Kenya is Kenya National Innovation Agency platform. And of course, other university research proposals, and of course, all of that. And of course, we also have what we call informed consent management. There's some digital consent form that you can always be able to share. It's not a must of you to go to the field. You can use the digital platform that the like the Qualtrics and the RedCap, that will always be providing you with a secure ways to document and participate. The participant consent, preventing the ethical, of course, violation. There's also an aspect of big data analysis for fraud detection. Apart from that, you also have what you call the capacity building. Maybe there are courses that are available even freely online that you can always be able to research on the research integrity and all of that. And of course, as I conclude, technology has transformed the research landscape, specifically in Kenya. And of course, by enhancing the integrity, improving the data security, and ensuring ethical compliance. From plagiarism detection to digital repositories, to peer review system, to fraud detection tools, technology is really playing a very key role in maintaining the credibility in academic and scientific institutions, research institutions, and of course, research in general. And of course, for us to be able to strengthen the research integrity further, the institutions must or should always continue to invest in the technological solution, researcher training, and of course, ethical oversight system. And of course, by embracing the innovation, us as a Kenya, as a continent as well, we can always build a more transparent, credible, and globally competitive research environment. Thank you so much for listening to me. May God bless you. Back to you, Akenya.
Thank you so much, Dr. Solomon Njani, for the very insightful session. Now we would like to move to the second speaker of the day, and that is when we move to the question and answer session. Before we begin, just a small announcement. I would like to inform everybody that Dr. Gagandeep Singh was unable to join the session due to health reasons, but we have the experience and expertise of Mr. Rajesh Day, who is a senior commissioning editor on the Global Books editorial team at Taylor and Francis Group. To give a brief introduction about Mr. Rajesh Day, he primarily collaborates with academic authors from South Asia and Africa in the areas of computer science, statistics, physics, and mathematics. With over 15 years of experience in the publishing industry, Rajesh has worked with several international publishing houses. He specializes in managing scholarly programs and is a strong advocate for open access and open research. Rajesh Day holds an MBA from Narsi Monji Institute of Management Studies and an MA in Philosophy from Ravindra Bharati University. As an author, his expertise extends to contributing to academic discussions, such as a chapter on Beyond Borderlines, safeguarding and preservation of shared intangible cultural heritage between ASEAN and India, published in a Scopus Index edited book. Additionally, he has authored literary fiction and non-fiction books in Bengali. His articles have been published in books and occasionally in national newspapers like the Financial Times. We're honored to have him with us today. Over to you, Rajesh.
Thank you very much. Can somebody confirm whether you can hear me clearly or not?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the Africa Research and Impact Network for hosting this workshop on data management and research integrity in STEM. Today, I will be mainly talking about data management and research. I'm not coming from so-called academic background. I'm coming from a publishing experience. So all the discussion that I will be talking about today, all the points that I will be extending today are in context. You need to understand that in context of publishing, academic publishing. If you have any queries, any questions, please post it in the chat. There are many information in the slides. I have roughly 20 minutes, so I will not be going through all the points that is there. What I will do, I will touch upon the key points of the presentation. And after this session, I will share the slides with you. So you can get all the links that are given there about the research and impact of data management. DNF, can somebody also confirm if you can see my slides or not? Can you see my slide? Just type yes on the chat box.
Yes, we can see them.
Thank you, Anubhuti. Starting with a little introduction about the company I work for. I represent Taylor and Francis, which is a very old company, started at 1836, almost 2 centuries ago. We have offices and colleagues collaborating across globe, including offices in South Africa and New Delhi. We publish more than 2,600 journals and approximately 8,000 new books each year. And we have a backlist of 150,000 specialized titles. And all these books are academic publication. I will first start with the point of why is data sharing important in academic publishing. When we are talking about academic publishing, we are saying about journal publication as well as book publication. We always encourage authors to share supporting data and materials to strengthen their research findings when they are submitting it for the academic publication. Research data comes in many forms, but it is the key evidence that supports the claim in your publication. Sharing this data publicly helps to maximize the discoverability and impact of your research. It is also important that you share your research to help support the validation, the transparency, and the reproducibility of your result that you are sharing through your research. Nowadays, some global funders, they also have a mandate that you have to make the data share openly with your audience, with your readers. Sharing data makes research more transparent. It encourages new ideas, stronger discussion in the academic community. In TNF, we always support data sharing whenever possible, no matter the subject or type of research or the kind of different publication format you are using. Can be book publication, journal, open publication, open access publication. In all areas, we always support the data sharing. But please note that data should only be shared if it is ethically correct to do so, where that does not violate the protection of human subject. or other valid ethical or privacy or security concern. I will be talking more about it in one of the slides. So the data should only be shared when ethically appropriate, ensuring no violation of privacy, security, or the protection of human subject that if you have human subject in your research. So in this slide, I'm going to talk about the data, the main 4 part of the data sharing. When preparing to comply with the popular data policies, some steps need to be followed before submission, before manuscript submission. Sometimes even before starting your research, you need to make sure what kind of data policy or the data management rules you are going to follow in your research and therefore in your research publication. At the beginning of your project, we recommend you need to create a data management plan. In data management plan, which is a plan which will guide your decisions on how to prepare, store, and share your data throughout your research. It is also important to consider where your data set will be stored, such as selecting a suitable data repository. About that, we will be discussing more in one of the slides. But my suggestion is that do not start creating your data after completing your research or at the mid of the research. It would be always advisable to start at the beginning of your project. You may need to create a data management plan. There are multiple different kind of frameworks and policies are suggested. I will be sharing some of the links with you. Follow that when you are starting your research to prepare, store, and share your data. Before submitting your dataset to a repository, you must ensure it is ready for sharing. For example, if your research involves human participants, you may need to remove their name. You may need to remove any data which can be identified with the human participants. You also need to write the metadata. Metadata is data of the data, which describe your data sets, which talks about what kind of data you are actually using for the research. The metadata also should include the unit of measurement that you are using, whether it should avoid explaining the acronyms that you are doing in the research, because acronyms would be explained in your research anyway. Once all these things are prepared, you can upload your data set and metadata to a repository. Only after your data sets had been deposited and published, then you can draft the data availability statement as part of your manuscript submission. All steps, plan, prepare, deposit, scribe, need to be done before submitting the manuscript to a journal or a publishing platform. So here are a few tips that I want to share with you about identifying the data. The research data can also be input or output. That means it may be your own data that you have created, or maybe this is some data that you have taken from any openly available data set or from some other publication. So when sharing data, the first step is to identifying the data that should be made available. Research data can either be input or output of a study, depending on the research design that you are actually developing for your research. The formats of the data will it would be vary based on the study type and the academic discipline that you are in. If your manuscript includes charts, table, plots, figures, these are likely based on underlying data set that should be shared with your research, with your scholarly communication. Similarly, if your paper provides summary statistics such as average or standard deviation or p-values, the raw data behind this calculation should be shared. Finally, if your method selection section describe processes that generate or reuse data, it is important to consider making those dataset available to support transparency and reproducibility. So if you are sharing the data, someone who is reading your paper or who is reading your book, they will be able to go through that data, and they may also can use that data to come up with their own findings. So we'll be talking about more about that in the next slide. So there can be very roughly saying there can be two different kind of data sharing methods in the academic publishing. in one traditional way, where you are publishing it in part of a publication which is behind a paywall. That means if somebody is purchasing a book or a journal paper, they will be able to access the data. The other practices that are gaining popularity in last 15-20 years is the open data. What is open data? Open data is when you are making the data available as part of your open research. It is not behind a paywall. Anybody who can access your research will be able to access the data. We encourage making your data open as a publishing option whenever you are planning to submit your research article. Some of our journals and platforms specifically require that the data underlying an article should be open. And these are all part of the open science and open research that we promote and we recommend. Open research, what is open research? I'm sure most of us know about it, but just I want to share a few lines. Open research is about making the entire research process transparent and accessible to everyone. And open data is a key part of it. Open data in open research refers to the practice of making research data freely available for others to access, use in their research and data. So open data is a data that can be deposited in a public repository using the CC BY license. CC is basically Creative Commons license. All the open access publication, open science publication uses a standard international license, which is called Creative Commons license. So open data can also be made available using the same license. If you use that, not only the data will be freely available for anyone to access, but it will also be available for anyone who can access to your research. Open researcher can build upon your research and validate your research. Even when you are sharing it with the reviewer for the peer review process, they will be able to go through the data and share their feedback with you. In these cases, if you make your open data of your research, then questions about your finding goes almost zero, because nobody can ask your findings because the data is available. They can only ask the interpretation of the data that you are presenting in your research. How to make your data open? Select a suitable repository. That is a step one. I will be sharing some of the name of these platforms in my next slide. Second is that make sure there are no ethical issues with sharing your data. So some of the ethical issues we have discussed already. So make sure, look into the data, see if there is any data that can identify who the data is about. If there is a human subject, try to remove those data points and only share the points of the data which is cannot be connected to an actual human being. And deposit your data and apply for an open license. Open license is Creative Commons license that I was talking about. So here in this slide, I want to talk about the best practices for depositing research data. So use a recognized platform. So there are multiple different kind of platforms out there. You may ask which data repository is to believe. So we would recommend there are two very well-known platforms, Fair Sharing and re3data.org. If you go into this platform, it can suggest you based on your need, based on your discipline, it can suggest you what are the best certified data repositories that you can use. Some of them are even free. You don't have to pay anything. You just use that kind of platform. You need to register there and you can use this platform to share your data. We always suggest to try to find a platform which has a long-term preservation plan. If you submit it somewhere which is a very temporary place, maybe after a year or after a few years that get closed, then you will face a problem and you again have to find a different platform. So try to find out an international recognized data platform. And it also should give you a DOI, which is very, very important for journal publication. And it is also important for the data publication. At the point of submission, a good repository should mint a digital identifier. It can be DOI. DOI is the most popular one. That's why I'm talking about DOI. But If you don't have this DOI, your data remains easily citable and not trackable. It need to be easily citable and trackable. That's why DOI need to be there. At the point of submission, you will be encouraged to provide the DOI, the pre-registered DOI with the hyperlink. If you have selected to provide a pre-registered DOI, please be prepared to share the reviewer URL associated with it. Because when you are sending your research to a reviewer, they may ask for this for your data. At that point, you can only share the DOI with your reviewer, and they will be able to access the data. Here you can see we are talking about fair data principle. Fair data principle or fair principle is a principle that is being used in all the open access platform, open research, in open science. And in TNF, we encourage using the fair principle. What is fair principle? It is findable. Your research or your data need to be findable. It should be accessible. It need to be interoperable, and it need to be reusable. So these are the main four data principle which we try to see in all open access platform and open access publication. By taking this step, you not only increase the visibility and impact of your research, but also contribute to a more transparent and collaborative academic community. Because the other people can access your data, they will be able to see what kind of research, what kind of research is being produced by what data, and they will also be able to reuse your data to see other aspect of the same data. Now, one of the important thing about making your data, submitting your data is DAS. So probably some point or that in the time you have heard this term, data availability statement. So what is data availability statement? It is in your manuscript, you need to explain where the data is linked to the paper and can be found and how it can be accessed. This is a statement that goes with your publication. This statement should be included within the article, within your manuscript, and just before the reference section. If the data cannot be shared openly, author should clearly state the reason in the data availability statement why it cannot be shared openly. To assist with the process, there are guidelines and templates available in our website. And even all the major publication houses, even the data repository platforms that I was talking about in the last slide, you will be finding these guidelines and templates there. So on the left-hand side, I have given a link. If you go to this link, this is one of the dedicated website that Taylor and Francis has, which is called Author Services. It is a free website. Any researcher can go and access it. And you will see a list of guidelines and templates are given there, which will help you to prepare a clear and accurate statement of DAS. It should be just 1 or 2 sentences, why your data can be made open, or describe your data, include a description and link. That's it. And it should be just before the reference section. I hope I'm making sense, and I hope you are getting some information from the presentation. I want to remind you, if you have any questions, anything that you want to ask about any slides, just post your question here. Or we also have a Q&A session after the presentation. You can unmute yourself and ask your questions at that time. I only have like 4 more slides and I'm almost out of the time. So I'll quickly go through the last 3 slides I have. The other important thing about the data is citing it. And data citation has 2 ways. You need to cite the data that you are taking from other researcher or other sources, but that is not enough. That almost all researcher, we do it, right? But we also need to make sure that we are citing our own data. Even if you are referring to your own data set within an article, it is important that you cite it. Data are a key output of research and therefore need to be appropriately cited. Just as you cite a journal article or figure or conference paper, if you are using it within your article, you should also cite all data that you are using in your work. At Taylor and Francis, we support the Force 11 Joint Declaration of Citation Principle. What is it? It is an international standard of data citation by all the countries, and different kind of publication houses came together and signed this declaration, which recognizes data as an important and citable part of research. Data citation should be both human readable and machine readable. There can be people who cannot who is differently able, who may be using a machine to read your research. So when you are providing the data citation, try to follow the any international standard so that it can be both human readable and machine readable as well, so that you can ensure that your research is accessible and useful for everyone. Now you can ask, how should I cite my data? There are 4 different categories of citing the data. Number 1, the authorship. The individuals responsible for the creation of the data, their name should be there. Material designator, like the tag, like dataset. Third is the digital object identifier, DOI, that we were talking about. And the last thing is the location, where the author has deposited the data set. So all these 4 things should be there when you are citing your own data. So this is the last slide. And here I want to talk about little bit about the ethics of data. So time to time, we are dealing with different kind of sensitive human data. So careful planning is essential to ensure ethical and legal compliance are there. So today we are discussing about legal compliance. The earlier speaker also talked about it very beautifully. He has described the different kind of legal compliance are there in different countries. But not you need to compliant with the legal data, but also you need to ensure the ethical guidelines you are following. There are 2-3 main things that you need to remind about before you start doing your research. First, researchers should plan for data sharing in advance, which may include obtaining institutional review board approval when you are doing a research, or if you are taking a fund for somewhere, you need to take approval from the ethical board committee, which is called Institutional Review Board. IRB is the term that is generally being used. And other necessary permission need to be there. Next, it is important to seek informed consent from the participant. The participant, the humans, who if human data is involved, you need to take informed consent, and you need to have that consent in some form. Data should be anonymized before sharing or stored in a controlled access repository. It should be anonymized. When I'm saying anonymized, what does it mean? You need to remove any part of the data which can direct to the individual person and the human from where you have collected the data. So for that, the number 1, you need to clear the institutional review board approval. You need to seek informed consent from the participant. You need to anonymize the data when you are sharing the data with anyone. And last but not the least, you need to, in your data availability statement, you need to clearly explain whether you can share the entire data. There may be cases, there may be research cases where because of the ethical reason, you cannot share the data. Even then, in your data availability statement, you need to clearly explain why you cannot share the data, and the ethical and policy guidelines need to be explained. Sensitive data, if you forget everything, just remember the last line. The sensitive data sharing requires planning. Not only data sharing, the entire the data management that we are discussing about today, it needs meticulous planning. It needs advanced planning. You cannot do it after like completing your research. Before, even if you are approaching your research or research publication, you need to have a very clear planning how you are going to deal with your data, how you will create it, how you will store it, how you will manage it, and what kind of policy guideline you are following, if there is particular framework that you are following, and if you want to share it in open repository, what open repository you will be using, and what are the international research guidelines for that. So with this, I have reached to the last slide of my presentation. I have just taken 1 minute more. I hope you like the presentation. After this session, I will share the presentation with everyone. And if you have questions, just ask me right now. And I would be happy to have more sessions like this to talk about data. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rajesh. And thank you also to Solomon and Jane for those very insightful remarks and insights. And I'm not going to summarize what we've talked about now, but I just want to take us through the Q&A session. And to our attendees, if you feel you have any question that you really need to be addressed by the panelists, kindly feel free to raise your hand and we'll be able to give you the platform. In the meantime, Rajesh and Solomon, there are two questions in the chat box. So one, I want to know how to go about data storytelling. And the other question is from Meram. Meram is one of our accountable adaptation fellows. And she asks, how can we add qualitative data as open data, especially if the data is not in English? So any of you can just take one question and the other will address the other question.
Sari, go ahead. I'll go for the second question. Okay. So should I start addressing?
Yes, sure, please.
Okay. How to go about data storytelling? That was the first question, right? So
yes,
it's a completely different discussion because it is part of how to write a research article, because we are discussing about the scholarly communication. So when you are developing your manuscript, how you can use your data to tell your story, that's a completely different discussion. In one or two lines, what I can tell you is that if you are collecting the data, you must have interpretation that you are using the data for. So just start interpretation at the very beginning, give some examples so that the readers can connect what you are trying to portray. But we can discuss about it more. We have some resources on TNF. I'll be happy to share it with you. The second question was, how can we add qualitative data as open data, especially if the data is not in English? So it is not about whether the data type, it can be quantitative or qualitative. If you have created a data set and you are analyzing the data set, or you are interpreting the data set to share your research outcome, so that can be shared in that raw form or in the table format that you are using. And even if it is not in English, you have the numbers, you have the points, different kind of points, interview points that you are taking, or any qualitative data that you are collecting. You can share it with the as a open data. But the point is, what kind of publication are you doing? If you are doing your publication in English, then maybe you want to create a metadata which will explain about the data in English. That will increase the reachability and reusability of your data. Hope that clears the answer. If you do not, there is a third question I can see. If you do not add data on your research because it is restricted, will the researcher be accepted and taken as accurate? Yes, it would be. There are different kind of, for example, if somebody is working on a sensitive, topic, like somebody is maybe doing a research about a particular bomb and they don't want to share all the data publicly. But what you need to do, you need to keep your data with you. And maybe the reviewer or the publisher may ask you to share the data with them if required for the review process, but it is not mandatory to make your data openly available. But as I was sharing in my presentation, just make sure in your paper, in your manuscript, you are giving some explanation, some statement, why you cannot make the data open. So hope that clears the doubts. I'd be happy to have more questions.
Thank you very much, Rajesh. I don't see any other question unless someone has a question that they need to say, they need to ask, and they can raise their hand or just turn on their mic. If not, we'll let that go once. Okay, now there are several questions now coming in. So from Samuel Kinyanjui, I often see this in media when they're reporting sensitive information. They normally give a character, a name, which is not the real one. Is that right? And then the next question from Bansi, are there any specific data management frameworks? Do you want to take? I see Solomon is still not in, so I think you'll just have to
Solomon,
take them. I see he's not yet in. I think he left. I think he's having some
okay.
issues. You can just take them. Yeah, go ahead.
No problem. Thank you. So the first question was, I often see the media when they are, yeah, this is a way of sharing the information. So basically when you can, this is a way of anonymizing the data. So in one of the slide we were discussing about it, you cannot share any identifying information that can be connected or that can be identify the human subject that you are using for your research. So instead, in media, they replace that particular name or particular name or identifier with some other objects. That is a good policy that can be used. If possible, I would suggest remove it entirely from the data and keep some number or convert it some quantitative data so that it cannot be identified to the person. Because sometimes what happens, if you are replacing one name with other, we tend to create some kind of biases. So maybe we are using one kind of name or one kind of surname in that database, which can impact if it is not directly connected to the data interpretation, then it can create some other kind of interpretation of the data. So it is better to convert it into some quantitative data which cannot be interpreted or which cannot represent any kind of biases. So are there specific data management plan development frameworks? Yes, there are. So I would suggest for this, there are few links that I have talking about, like the fair sharing and re3data.org. If you go there, you will get more details about it. But more or less, the frameworks are the thing that I was talking about. The basic details, how you will cite your data, how you'll upload your data, how can it be included, whether you will use open data or closed data. Those are the kind of framework. There are like different kind of policies. If you go to this, even if you go to our website, we have like a huge literature about it, what kind of framework. But at the main thing is that it will depend on the kind of research you are doing and the kind of discipline that you are using that data for.
So thank you very
Sorry.
much, Rajesh. I see it's okay. I see Solomon is in. So maybe Solomon could take the next questions. Okay. So Solomon, which data sources are good for referencing in publication, and when can bleach? I think this is breach of copyright work in research. I'm not so sure what Angela Nalunga means by this, but hopefully she can turn on her mic and ask the question. But in the meantime, Solomon, over to you. Solomon? Okay, his internet is giving him issues. He's just texted that. It's okay. So, Rajesh, still over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So which data sources are good for referencing in publication? It's a very kind of generic questions. It will depend on the kind of research paper or research manuscript that you are writing. So data sources can be both the one data that you are developing, another that someone else's have a data that you are using in your research, right? So based on that, you will be referencing it. So if you are asking about the kind of referencing principle or referencing policy that you want to use, Then you can use APA, which is a very well-known. You can use Chicago, you can use Hart manuals. Any of these are very internationally standard practices. You can take any of that referencing manual and cite your data accordingly. Where can breach of copyright work in research? I guess you are talking about if when there is a breach of copyright. What is breach of copyright? I'm not very sure. What can you switch on your mic and can you please tell us what do you mean by breach of copyright? Are you talking about two different publication connected to each other? Or are you talking about plagiarism, when somebody is unlawfully, unethically taking some data or research from someone else's work and using it? Can you please switch on your mic and share a little bit?
Thank you about that. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Angela from
Good
Uganda. Yes, so I was wondering for plagiarism, but someone not directly referencing data, and yet there is already a publication that has happened. At what point is that a breach of copyright? Yeah.
Very interesting question. Very, very interesting question. Thank you for asking this. It has like very nuances. So let me rephrase the question that you have asked. Somebody has used one data to publish a particular research. Somebody else is using the same data to publish the same research in different language. Yes, obviously it is very unethical and it is a kind of plagiarism that is there. So if any publication house like us, if we detect it, then we will not accept that particular paper or particular manuscript. If it is realized after the publication, then it would be retracted. There can be other option as well. If you are making your data openly available and you are making your data openly available for open research, that means you are allowing other people, other researcher to use your data to come up with different kind of interpretation. For example, if some other researcher look into your data and contradict the findings that you have shared on your publication, that is a healthy practice, and that should be more and more people should do it. That's why we keep talking about open science and open data, because then you make the data openly available. Across the globe, multiple different kind of researcher can read the data, look into your interpretation, look into how you have analyzed the data, and they can either support your findings or they can question your finding. That is completely ethical and that is not plagiarism. I hope I've been able to respond to the query that you had.
All right. So I think there are no other questions, and we have 6 minutes left to the end of the session, and I just want to take this opportunity to take a moment to reflect on the critical discussions that we've had today and express my most sincere gratitude for our engagement, both our panelists and the attendees in general. A key takeaway from our conversation today is the importance of open data, not just as a principle, but as a practice that also enhances transparency, accessibility, and research impact. And one of the crucial aspects that we also explored today is the role of data availability statements, among other things, in promoting openness, reproducibility, and also accountability. And the other key takeaway that I've also got from this discussion is the importance of robust data governance by ensuring that we comply with institutional and national policies while also balancing flexibility and accessibility of our data and research in general. And here we looked at regulations like and institutional policies such as the ones of science granting institutions, national science granting institutions such as NACOSTI, and the broader ethical and legal frameworks, which are also critical for maintaining data integrity and privacy and trust in our research in general. We've also heard from our panelists who've emphasized the importance of secure storage solutions, including platforms such as the cloud storage, encryption, and multiple backup strategies to prevent data loss. So, from both our panelists, we've also been able to understand that there are ethical concerns that have to be addressed in the process of conducting our research. These issues such as biasness, confidentiality, coercion, and the challenges of obtaining and withdrawing consent, especially from vulnerable populations. These issues, the ethical concerns, highlight the delicate balance between data openness and responsible research practices. There was also the issue of AI, and these are some of the key issues that we have been able to at least summarize from what our panelists have talked about, have mentioned. But most importantly, one thing remains clear, that collaboration is key between researchers, institutions, publishers, and policymakers in order to foster that culture of ethical, open, and responsible data management. So, colleagues, the insights that have been shared today are very instrumental in shaping our collective approach to data governance and security and accessibility and availability and transparency, name them all. So with all this, I just want to extend my sincere gratitude first to our panelists for making it here today and giving us these insights, and secondly to our esteemed attendees for being engaging and interactive during this session. The questions that you've been asking, they've been very instrumental in also giving further insights into today's topic. So, and I also want to extend my sincere gratitude to Taylor and Francis as an institution for making this workshop a success, for collaborating with ARIN. Most importantly, Taylor and Francis and ARIN have an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, between the two institutions, ARIN as a research institution and Taylor and Francis as a publishing institution, to always help or mentor ARIN researchers and fellows to be able to produce empirically grounded research. And this also this is also me making a clarion call to our attendees who are not fellows, who are not already part of the ARIN fellowship family, to also make some effort towards joining the same. So once again, thank you very much to T&F, ARIN, and all the participants for making this workshop a success. Let us continue these conversations beyond this forum and work together to ensure that open data is a tool for equity, integrity, and impact in research. Thank you very much. Asante sana, and I wish you all a blessed and wonderful weekend. Before we leave, there's a group photo that we're supposed to be taking, and anyone who is interested can turn on their camera and we can have the photo. Either Edna or Nancy or Florence, just please take us through the process.